This is 2 Minutes Together, a ministry of Central Lutheran Church, Eugene, Oregon. I'm Pastor Ben. This week in our New Testament reading, our epistle reading, second lesson, is from the book of Hebrews, and it says something unusual about Jesus, that Jesus was a priest. And the reason it's doing it is because it's talking about what priests did in the Old Testament, which were the priests were the ones who communicated with God through ritual action, who made sacrifices on behalf of the people, who prayed on behalf of the people. And so the book of Hebrews says that's what Jesus does. He made an offering, in this case of himself, to God on behalf of the people. It's a good theology, but there's a challenge. And the challenge is, in the Old Testament, not just anybody could be a priest. No other book in the New Testament calls Jesus a priest, because to be a priest, you had to be either a descendant of Aaron or from the tribe of Levi. Jesus was not one of those things. So he didn't qualify as a priest. And so what does the book of Hebrews do? It does something interesting. He says, well, there's actually one more model you've forgotten. In the book of Genesis, there is an unusual character who shows up by the name of Melchizedek, who visits Abraham and who is a priest of God. We never heard of this Melchizedek before. We never see him afterward. Obviously, he pre-existed Levi and Aaron, so he's not a descendant of either of those. So the book of Hebrews says, well, that's what Jesus is. Jesus is a priest in the order of Melchizedek, that kind of priesthood. And it says God appointed him priest of God. Well, therefore, if God can appoint Melchizedek, then God can appoint Jesus. God can do things we don't understand. And one of those things is to let people be priests who we didn't think were qualified. Well, there's a little bit of this kind of creative exegetical imagination from the Old Testament, but I'd like to suggest also another thing for our reflection today. That is that God appointed someone who was not a priest to be a priest, to be one of those people who speaks directly with God. One of the things we believe as Lutherans is that we are a priesthood of all believers. There's not just some people who relate directly with God, but all believers relate directly with God. That at our baptism, God has appointed all of us as priests who can relate with God directly and need no intermediary beyond Christ himself. At our baptism, we have taken on Christ, that great high priest. And thus, we are all priests before God, all able to communicate directly with God. This is 2 Minutes Together. I'm Pastor Ben.